welcome to part one of three of how to get onto the property ladder. Today, we're going to be running through what we call financial foundations with you all. It's all about, building your resilience and getting ready for any future goals, in particular, buying your first home. The other two sessions we're going to be running will be focused around goal setting and kind of saving up your deposit. And the final one will be around getting mortgage ready. Just some logistics. So please make sure you've got the kind of worksheet in front of you. We will be kind of working through that as we go through, and it'll mean you can kind of follow like a number of things we're talking about as we run through this workshop. There are going to be a few polls, so keep an eye out for those, so we can get a sense of where people's heads are at with some of the questions we ask. We will be sharing this presentation at the end, so everyone, it doesn't need to take huge amounts of notes. You'll have access to all this material. And in terms of questions, we'd really like it if people kind of ask questions as they go along. So there's a Q&A channel. We'll look to kind of answer them either real time, or in some cases, we might even just kind of incorporate the questions that you have into kind of what we're presenting. Finally, we're aiming to finish within the hour. And we've got actually a lot of stuff to cover, so we're gonna jump straight in. In terms of what we are covering today, really what we're looking to do is to really break things down for people. So, one of the things we really try and achieve is to really simplify, how people need to kind of think around their finances and help structure that thinking up as well. So what we're going to do today is kind of really focus on the foundation areas. We're going to kick off with Peter. Well, we're going to kick off with me introducing our company for a little bit, and then Peter is going to talk through what a financial plan is, and the kind of impact it can have. Then we're going to work through these first three areas with you. So kicking off with making a budget, then taking stock of any debts you may have and how to think through that. And then finally, looking at how to build an emergency fund. Then we're going to kind of cover where you can go beyond that and really set the groundwork for kind of ongoing goals, in particular, buying your first home. So how to think through setting those goals and how to kind of stay on track with your financial plan. But there'll be a lot more detail around building deposits and getting mortgage ready in other kind of sessions we run. Right. So, sorry guys, I've just clicked end button instead of the next slide. So I'm gonna have to go all the way back. Sorry, hope I didn't give anyone whiplash there. Right, introduction to Multiply. So we've founded the company in 2016. I'm one of the co-founders. We essentially exist to help people achieve the futures they want, and by doing that, help them make more of themselves. And we do this by providing very specific, personalized help to people, which in the UK is known as financial advice. We've fully automated advice, but we're organizing workshops like this so that we can explain the way that our advice engine works and the kind of advice that we provide people with. And simply put, what our product does is connect people through to the right products and the right amounts at the right time. And where we're at excitingly now is instead of just being an app that provides you with advice, we're also now starting to move money in line with those recommendations. So when we, advise someone to open up a certain account or to invest some money, now we're building up the functionality in the app such that you can just do it within the app and just follow our advice. In terms of the people on this in this workshop today, obviously there's Annie, who's our content lead, who kind of put the workshop together, and then there's Daniel, Peter, and myself. So I'm a CEO and co-founder. I've also now passed my advisor exams, but prior to that, I had quite a long history in the finance space, mostly as a trader. Peter is our head of advice. He's someone I learn from all the time around how to actually, the ins and outs of providing advice. He's had a huge amount of experience in the space, spending over 25 years as an advisor, and has had a lot of experience managing teams of advisors as well. And we also have Daniel, who's had over 12 years experience in the advice space. So there's quite a lot of advice experience on the call today. And in terms of the goal of buying your first home, all of us bought our first homes more than 10 years ago. In Peter's case, it's a lot more longer than that. Cool. So I'm now going to hand it off to Peter, who's going to start running through, laying the kind of initial foundations and kicking us off with what a financial plan is.
Right. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'd just like to reiterate that the laying of the foundations is the most crucial part of financial planning. If it's like a house, you know, if you don't have solid foundations to start off with, then however grand you make that property to be and that lifestyle that you might have, if the foundations aren't right, then unfortunately things can go wrong. So we make no apologies for spending time on the foundations, even though I've seen through many client meetings where there is a natural I want to get on with my home buying goal, or I want to get on with my building my wealth. Part of the financial advisor's role is to just bring it back to laying your foundations and just make sure that they are well set. Okay, so in terms of financial plan, let's start with a poll. The basic question which we're asking people is, what is a financial plan? 3 potential answers here. You would be surprised how I have seen all 3 of those answers come up when I have spoken to clients in the past. Okay, so we'll just leave a few moments for you to answer the question as you see it.
I didn't know that, Peter, that this was from real experience. These
Oh,
3
yes. Oh, yes, yes. And it really is important that sort of people understand the importance of a financial plan. Now, a financial plan has a number of connotations for different people, and I think my own son, who's 22, enjoying his life at the moment, he's maybe one of those who might answer. I could predict what his answer might be. So, you know, sometimes with answers, there's not always a right and a wrong as well. So right.
Thank you everyone for voting so quickly. Peter, we've got some results.
Right, go on, far away.
So we had 36% of people, so 5 people answered with a list of your current finances and a list of your goals. Okay. And nearly double that number of people responded with a set of actions that takes you from A to B. And quite surprisingly, no one said something older people do.
Right. Well, that's the one that I think my son might have pressed with me in mind, probably, when he was pressing it. But no, that's great to see. And both A and B are both factors that come into it. But the actual correct answer, Vivek, if you just want to bring that up on the screen, right? It's a set of actions that takes you from A to B. That's the correct answer to it. However, sometimes one of the tasks that you have to do to get there is to list out your current circumstances, etc. So it's not necessary that those people that put A were necessarily wrong. It's just that that's part of getting to the plan, which is the set of actions to get you from A to B. And I've met many financial advisors who have really honed in on this, a plan of set of actions from A to B. And I actually think they've actually slightly missed the point, because that's what a plan is. But you can get a good plan by actually being a bit more specific about where you currently are and where you're trying to go. So the A as being properly assessed as to where you are, and that's where listing out things like your outgoings, etc., is so key. And B, being properly defined as well. Now, sometimes B is harder to define than you realise, okay? And that's because sometimes the goal can be a bit woolly, but we'll come back to goal setting a bit later on in this, and also for home buying, we'll be much more specific in the next workshop regarding that. But even then, a good plan might be to properly assess A and B, but actually a great plan, which is what financial planners should really be aspiring to. And when I say financial planners, we all as individuals are financial planners of our own. Okay, sometimes we might have some help from somebody, but we should all be taking on our responsibility for this. And this is where not only have you got your set of actions to get you from A to B, you've also made sure that you've properly assessed where A and B are, but you've also got to assess that your goals are actually achievable. Okay, and building contingency for things that might go wrong. It's quite common that the good plan is quite often carried out, and sometimes the great plan is the bit that's missed. And again, the building in contingencies for things that might go wrong is something that, if I look back to many a meeting that I've had where clients would be saying to me, I hear what you're saying, but I really just want to crack on with this. What we found in recent months, in light of the COVID experience, we've seen how important people are actually seeing this much more for themselves. But at the end of the day, if I was to try and summarize up the importance of the financial plan, I think to take somebody like Johnny Wilkinson, the rugby player, from the age of 8, he has already building out and drafted his plan as to what he needed to do to be able to become basically what I would define as probably the world's greatest ever rugby player. That might be debatable, but he had set those goals and bits in place for a long time. And from a financial planning perspective, the plan is maybe not just the blueprint of where you are and where you want to be, but it's actually those steps that take you from A to B. So in the building world, we would see that quite often as the building regulations. Building regulations are usually bits that the council are setting out to say, okay, we give you permission to build that house, but it must be built to these standards. Okay, so really can't stress enough the importance of the financial plan itself. Okay, so when it comes to defining your A and your B, which do you think is, another poll question, which do you think is most important? A, your current position, or B, your goals? Was there anything you wanted to
add? For a minute or so.
Yeah. Was there anything you wanted to add to what I've said so far, Vivek, or have I covered it off?
No. I think you're spot on. I think so often we see financial plans as being the difference between, someone achieving their goal and someone just, making slow progress. And I think, once you've got a plan in your hand, it can be very powerful to kind of helping you on that journey. Yeah. We've had all of our responses in, so this is quite interesting. Let me see if I can share these results. We've had an overwhelming majority of people answer that we should start with your current position first. And 13% of people say start with your goals.
Right. Well, the good news with this one is that you actually probably couldn't have been wrong, because you can actually do it either way. So you can actually do it as your plan, you'll set out your goals first or your current position. However, reality of it is that we generally recommend that people will look to try and set their current position out first. Okay. And typically the reason why we ask people to do that first is it helps you set out goals that are more realistic in the first place. And again, this is something that I've seen on a number of occasions, whereby I'll sit down with a person and they'll say, right, I've got £1,000 a month of disposable income, and what I want to do is I want to buy a property that's going to cost me, I need £50,000 in 3 years' time. And straight away, the maths are saying to me, well, this isn't going to be possible, because the most you'll be able to achieve there is £36,000, for example. Or it could be that somebody hasn't necessarily fully thought through where they want to live, how much that might mean that they need as a deposit, understanding the mortgage market to a degree so that they can assess their goal first. So broadly, we say to people, if you assess your own current position first, then that will help you get away from unrealistic pipe dreams. And it is actually crushing sometimes to actually sit down with somebody who is really G'd up for you helping them get to their goal. And one of the first things you're having to say to them is, I'm not sure you're going to be able to afford that 3-bedroomed house. It might be more realistic that you're into more the territory for where you want to live in a ground floor flat. And that is, it's crushing as much for us as it is the person who's receiving that. So tip here, set your current position out first. That's the number one bit for me. All right. So I'm going to pass back to Vivek now, who will take you a bit more through some of that.
Yeah, that's a smooth transition into exactly how do you understand your current position. And that's what I'm going to kick off covering now. So there's kind of 3 parts to that. The first is all around making a budget. Then there's kind of taking stock of any debts you have and being able to classify them. And then building an emergency fund. In terms of making a budget, we're going to kick off with a quick poll, just to get a sense of what people think a budget is. And this will help, I guess, us explain what a budget is, but also how it can be particularly useful. I'm loving the fact that someone's gone for a baby budgie. And we actually haven't checked whether that's actually not the right term for a baby budgie, by the way, guys. It could well be. Okay, we've got 100% of people who've now answered. So we are, okay, this is really interesting. So an estimate of your income and outgoings over a set period of time in the future. 70% of people gave that response. Review of your previous income and spending. 12% of people, a list of your monthly outgoings, 12% of people. And one person thought it's a baby budgie. Right, so I guess the good news is that people are, like 70% of people have a good sense of what a budget actually is. It does actually incorporate a lot of these other aspects. So in order to kind of put your budget together, you need to have a good sense of what your total monthly outgoings are. And you should actually review previous income and spending to give yourself an idea. But really what a budget does is it allows you to really do that on a kind of forward-looking basis. And that's when it comes particularly useful when it comes to a financial plan. One thing we see is that people nearly always underestimate what their outgoings are. It's, you know, we very rarely see people overestimating what they are. And really, you know, when it comes to a budget, this is almost like the first point of control that people have with their money. It's the first thing that they can kind of assess, have a think about, and start putting some degrees of control around it, such that they can start controlling how much goes towards the other parts of their financial plan, whether that be something like an emergency fund, or it could be their goals, or whatever it may be. We've got another question. So it's all well and good figuring out what a budget is and kind of having a stab at it. But it's actually really important to try and think about what the ideal time period to do a budget for. And this is this is something again that we've seen people, lots of people kind of have a go at budgeting. And we've really seen that there is a time period for people to do this for that is particularly optimal. So this is another poll. I've just launched it, and we'll wait for a minute or so for all the kind of responses to come through. So nearly everyone's responded now. Great. So we've had responses in, and this is very interesting. So the majority of people responded that the ideal time period is to do this on a monthly basis, followed by quarterly, weekly, and only one person thought the ideal time period is annually. That's pretty interesting, isn't it, Peter?
Yeah, directly linked into my experience over the years as well. That is where people typically may think. I'm guessing that we've probably got the majority of people who are on this are probably paid monthly, with some that are weekly paid. Would be my guess, because quite often this answer is the response to this is often linked to the frequency with which people get paid.
So as advisors, what we advise people to do is to set up an annual budget. And the reason we do that is because in a 1 year kind of 12-month base, on a 1 year 12-month basis, you actually get to get a good sense of any kind of big spending or major outgoings that take place across the whole year. And it allows you to capture any kind of seasonality or any kind of seasonal effect. So a really good example of that is capturing something like Christmas and kind of, what you'd spend on Christmas presents. I guess another really good example would be any holiday spending over summer. Obviously, not so much right now during COVID, but it allows you to kind of think about not just your day-to-day living expenses and not just what you're spending on a monthly basis like rent or whatever it may be. It also forces you to kind of think of, okay, come December, come like the summer season, come whatever it may be, other outgoings that you kind of need to account for, and then essentially smooth out into kind of like a 12-month period. So that's the ideal time period to budget for, really, to kind of play yourself through the next 12 months and figure out what you'd be spending in addition to kind of your normal monthly expenditure on each of those months. And the other thing we do, and again, this is like linked to our experience, is that once we do get people's data in around kind of what they feel their budget's going to be, so how much income they're going to be getting, as well as like their outgoings, we normally take a bit of a buffer on their outgoings before starting to allocate anything towards their plan. This is just through experience of just finding that in many cases people just tend to underestimate what their outgoings are, but also beyond that, it's just to account for the unexpected things that life throws at people. And the way the kind of output of this exercise, so of doing a budgeting exercise in the world of financial planning, is that you kind of look at what your income is, you look at the gross and net income. From that net income, you deduct your kind of monthly, well, over the net income across a year, you deduct your kind of outgoings over a year. And then that leaves you with, on an annual basis, what we call NDI, which is net disposable income. And this is essentially what you can afford to put towards your plan. And is like one of the first kind of critical numbers that we look to kind of calculate for people. Peter, is there anything else you'd add on budgeting?
Only that with today's open banking, the actual process of doing this can be a lot easier now. And although it comes with a slight caveat that whilst a lot of these the open banking can reveal a lot about oneself, you do sometimes just need to be a little bit cautious around some of the conclusions that they can make. So, and the example I'm going to make here is that it's very easy to take, for example, Tesco's, let's say Tesco's or Sainsbury's, and bucket it into food shopping, which, but actually, as we know, a lot of these stores now actually do far wider than just food shopping. So just need to use the tools because they give you great insights into your spending. Just be mindful of, like with lots of these things, as time develops, they'll get better and better at giving you more and more accurate insights as we go through. But yeah, no, they keep it. And again, it's worth spending the time on it. You were talking there about the buffer that is put in place there. I can't think of the last occasion when I actually sat down with somebody and actually there wasn't an outgoing that I could ask them about whether they'd included it, and they had absolutely included everything. So spend the time on it, because it's important to establish the difference between your income and your outgoings. That's ultimately what you're trying to do, to find out how much you can potentially use to target towards your goals. Okay.
Great. Now the next bit, in terms of understanding your current position, is to do with debts. Peter, over to you.
Yeah. Good debt, bad debt, impact debts. Right. Well, this is an interesting one, because I've got to be honest that when I first came into the industry, and even from the first probably 5 to 10 years of being in the industry, there was this sort of blanket approach to debt equals bad, savings equals good. And that's a sort of, it's almost a textbook out of the financial planning manuals principle, where actually life isn't like that. There are debts that we could definitely say are bad, and there are some debts that we could say, well, that's all right, nothing wrong with that. So when we talk about taking stock of debt, what we're broadly talking about here is, as part of your budgeting exercise that you would have done to list out your outgoings, etc., some of that may include debt. Now, the important bit with that is to establish credit card debt needs to potentially be split into two, because a lot of people will use a credit card with the aim of simply that they use it, they put it on the card, and at the end of the month, they pay it off, right? And it's always brought back to a zero. Well, in that scenario, that's not necessarily a bad debt. That is a good debt, okay? Because it's being managed properly. Right? However, I do have a word of caution with that. The credit card companies work by giving you these pay it off in a month, you don't pay any interest, because they know full well that a percentage of those people will either through just bad luck or bad management put themselves in a position where they don't quite clear the debt each month. And on that balance, that's where they're starting to take money. In that scenario where somebody's not clearing their debt every month, you've suddenly moved what could be defined as a good debt into a bad debt. And what it also means is that it's not as simple for me to say to you, credit card equals bad debt, car loan equals good debt, payday loan equals bad. It's not as simple as that, because we're all human beings and manage things in different ways. But credit card is one that I think is quite common for us to be able to say, well, in your scenario, you seem to be managing it well and using it, not paying interest. Okay, that's a good debt. But in your scenario, for example, you are overspending. That's sometimes the conclusion we have to say to people. You are not spending within your means, okay? And therefore, it's a bad debt. But we also have other factors that we need to bring into play. So, for example, if we look at a home buying goal, whilst we'll look into this in a lot more detail at other webinars, it is worth just pointing out at this point that a credit card that is well managed, even if it's not completely cleared every month, okay, can actually be, in the home buying experience, can be deemed a good debt, because you are showing your ability to keep on making payments to something and keeping it within your overall limit. So, for example, if somebody has £1,000 credit card limit, if you spend within a quarter of that, even if you don't clear it every month, a lender is looking at it saying, oh, that's good, they are maintaining their payments. That's all they're really worried about when it comes to a mortgage, is, are they going to get their money? Okay, so credit card debt is a really good example of one that can be seen as good and bad debt in different scenarios based upon just your budget, but also in terms of your goal. Okay. There are some other debts that I would potentially signpost out as being not necessarily bad debt or good debt, but just acceptable debt. So, for example, a lot of people have cars and they will finance those cars, and in a few years' time, they will change the car and they will take out a new loan. It's almost like it's deemed an acceptable debt. And as an advisor, who am I to sit there and say, no, you're not allowed to have a car until you have cleared off all your other debts, raised enough money to buy a car out? Life isn't like that, okay? So there are what I call acceptable debts there. But it is worth noting that I would definitely frown upon's maybe the wrong word, but I would highlight that if you can avoid payday loans, okay, please do, because the interest that they charge on them are typically very, very high. So try and avoid them. Try overdrafts, okay? Try and avoid those as well, all right? Particularly, even if you are clearing it every month, there are scenarios that I've seen a lot of the times where people go into their overdraft, get paid, it brings it back into a positive balance, but then as they spend again, they're going down. And sometimes that they get deeper and deeper and deeper into the overdraft from what seems like just a little bit to start off with. So overdrafts, try and avoid them if you can. Payday loans, try and avoid them if you can as well. Credit cards is the quirky one, right? Especially when you've also got things like these 0% interest features. Now, to me, 0% features are great for people who are in debt and trying to manage their way out of it, but try not to use it as being a pool of money that you can access, because life is going to throw things at us that all of a sudden our well-intentioned plans to utilize something as a service for ourselves can suddenly backfire against us. Okay, so that's what I would say has been a key bit with the debts. Right?
I was just going to ask about one other type of debt, actually, which is quite common, which is student debt. What's your thinking around that?
Student debt, as in government, well, typically government-based debt. There are a number of factors here with the student debt. You can say it is cheap money. It's cheap money to borrow. You don't have to repay it until your income is over a certain level. So I totally see the advantages of using it. Just be aware that in a home buying scenario, it's still a debt. So if you are paying back, if a lender sees that you've got a debt to pay back, that will usually mean that they won't lend you as much as they could have done if you didn't have the student debt. Right? It's one of those things that they never teach you. For some people, that might be too late. And that's the challenge that we quite often see, is that some of these bits people aren't told at the time. You know, in my view, if somebody takes a student loan out, they should be told that there is a risk that this could impact on your future borrowing ability if it came to either buying secured debt, which is like a mortgage, or unsecured debt, which might be just a general personal loan from a bank. Okay.
Thanks, Peter.
Okay. Now, so the principle, though, is we're trying to clear debt. I think that's what we're trying to achieve. The next part, though, is we now need to think about the what ifs in life. Okay, so I've got a poll question here, which is a question to you about how big do you think your emergency fund should be. Okay, I'll just give that.
Thanks everyone for being so on it with these polls. These are almost record times we've been getting. Right, we're nearly there. Let's give it a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the poll there. Right, check that out, Peter.
That's
We've
it.
definitely got a, over half of the people on this call selected 3 months.
Yeah.
But a good number, a fair few going for 6 months, and the same number of people going for 1 month or 12 months.
That's right.
Luckily, no one went for 1 week.
Yeah, that's right. This is an interesting subject in its own right, because you could ask 100 different advisors what they feel is the right recommendation for an emergency fund, and you would get a similar spread across different scenarios. Some advisors might say you should base it on your income, and some would say you should base it on your outgoings. Some would say 3 months, some might say 6, some might even say 12 months. And it really sums it up that there isn't a hard and fast rule with it. Advisors probably wouldn't go less than 3 months in their recommendations, okay? And most probably wouldn't go as high as 12 months of outgoings as being a fair. Typically, I've seen 3 through to 6 months, sometimes income, sometimes outgoings. But we would typically recommend that. Well, another factor to bear in mind here is that in all of the years of giving advice, this area was often seen as a barrier for the person who I was seeing. That they would say, well, why are you telling me that I need to be putting money aside for this? I want to buy a home. I know what I want to do, or I want to invest some money. I know what I want to do. And I think nothing more than the pandemic that we've seen in the last 3 to 6 months has really brought out to people that Christ didn't really realize that this is the type of thing that an emergency fund is there for, and we typically used to recommend 3 to 6 months, depending upon whether you were self-employed or employed, with the principle being that self-employed people might need a bit more behind them because of fluctuations in income. But it's something that, we feel that people should have around 6 months of outgoings, okay, as being their emergency fund. Now, we're realistic. Somebody can't just always, there's 6 months of outgoings, and it takes a period of time for people to be able to build that up, okay? But that's the type of amount that people should be looking for. And by emergency, we don't mean so much the car might break down scenario. It's more the car might break down even though I'm servicing it regularly scenario. And there's subtle difference there being. So it's a bit like the boiler. You should be building into your budget, regularly having a boiler serviced, but life is like that. You might need something for a replacement boiler. That's the scenario. What it's not for is being I don't need to budget for anything else. My outgoings are really low. I can party on, and I've got an emergency fund if something comes along that really I should have been planning for anyway. Okay, so that's the amount of the budget, the emergency fund. We then start to look at what potential sources there might be. Oh, sorry, just before I do that, what I would just like to say is that people's risk tolerance can sometimes change it as well. So we will sit there and say, I've just said, about 6 months of outgoings. But a high-risk person might be prepared to take a bit more risk on this subject and maybe have a slightly lower emergency fund, right? A more cautious person, which I meet more of, to be perfectly honest, More people say to me, I would rather not keep £5,000 aside. I would much rather keep 20,000 aside. That's more common to see. All right. But I'm just saying there that sort of it's not necessarily a hard and fast line. Potential sources can be a factor as well. Some people, the riskier people, I'd say, are those that might say, well, I'll use my credit card as an emergency fund. As an advisor, I would actually back away from that and say you really shouldn't be doing that as being your source of emergency fund. But it could be used as the I'm going to put some money into a savings account that maybe I can't access for 30 days because I can get better interest, but I would put my credit card will be the emergency, the immediate, I need it now. That's different. Another potential source that is often comes up is, well, my family, they'll help me out, right? And it's a more and more common one that I'm hearing. The only bit I say to people is, and I'm not saying not to do it, I'm just saying be aware of two things. One, you might be okay seeing your parents or your grandparents as being a potential source, but are they? So therefore, if you are going to use it, it's only fair you maybe have a conversation about it. To which, as a parent myself, I know if my son came to me and asked me that scenario, I would say, okay, I understand what you're trying to achieve. Okay. The other thing with that is also to bear in mind that when it comes to potential sources, your parents, grandparents may not actually have the money available at the time you have your emergency. So just be aware of it. All right. So a little bit of time spent on emergency funds there, but actually I make no apologies for it because this is all part of laying down the right mixture of foundation to your financial foundation.
Peter, we actually got a great question that just came in from Jemima.
Yep.
Which is, should we have one overall emergency fund or funds for specific scenarios?
Right, I can answer this two ways, right? There's the accountancy response to this, where somebody who is very detailed and analytical and's got spreadsheets managing their monies for all sorts, they may choose to go into have lots of different specific scenarios, okay? And there's nothing wrong in that, right? Equally, for many people, just having one overall emergency fund that is designed to cover those different scenarios would be okay. What I would say to you is the danger with going down a specific scenario route is that you end up building an emergency fund that is suddenly 24 months of outgoings because you're trying to cater on an assumption that all of those specific scenarios happen at once, and that's not likely to happen. So that's where the one to cover all of them. I hope that makes sense. But what I'm basically trying to say is you would be in really, really bad luck if all of the emergency scenarios happen to you at the same time. Right? So great question. I think my response is I'm happy either way. But if you do go down the specific routes, just factor in something that brings in the likelihood of it happening, or else otherwise your emergency fund is going to become really big and you're going to have a lot of money kept in easy access accounts that, with interest rates being what they are at the moment, you're actually losing money. And that's a factor you need to bear in mind with anything to do with short-term savings is at the moment, even with earning some interest rates, the impact of inflation means that you're losing money. All right, hope that answers it anyway.
Great. Should we move on to the next section, Peter?
Yes. Setting your goals. This is what we're going to cover here are very much the basics that sit behind it. So we're not going to be going into the real detail, particularly with home buying. That's the next session. But this is very much principles that you should apply, whether your goal is, I want to save £1,000 for a year's time for, I don't know, boys or girls weekend or whatever, or whether it be for a big purchase like a home or savings, investing for the future. Okay, could you just bring this slide on? The big bit that I think I've got to say with setting of goals and defining your objectives is define your objectives and set your goals. It sounds really silly to say that, but I know a lot of people that if you don't actually set your target properly, then how do you know where you're even aiming? How do you know that you're actually going in the right direction at all? So my first top tip for this section is write it down. Even if it's an obvious goal, such as I want to buy a property in X amount of time or whatever, where I need X amount of money, right? Or even if it's I'm not got a really specific purpose for this, but this is, shall we say, for my general financial future, write it down. And again, there is lots of research here that comes back down to that planning principle, which is if you write something down, you're far more likely to achieve it than if you don't in the first place. Another bit that I would just link in with that is SMART goals. Okay, you might have at work have heard of the principles of SMART, where S stands for specific. So making sure that your goal is specific, making sure it's measurable. Okay, making sure that it's an achievable goal, and a relevant goal. Okay, and what I mean by relevant is that it's relevant to you. If it's not relevant to you and it's relevant because somebody else is telling you should be doing something, you're more likely to fail. So make it a relevant goal to yourself, and most importantly, make sure it is time bound. Okay, so there's a sort of a achievable time-bound goal here. So SMART. Okay, if we haven't got it up on the on the chat or something, I'll make sure it's up at some point. All right, but that's the key bits that I would say with that. Timelines as well. If you could just move it on, Vivek. Thank you. Short terms. You'll often hear people say short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals with financial planning. I just say be wary, because short, medium, and long are relative to the goal that you're trying to achieve. So if, for example, we are talking about a home buying goal where somebody wants to buy a home within, let's say, the next 4 or 5 years, or we would say there that you're typically going to be looking at savings accounts. By that, I mean bank building society type accounts. And we would change the definitions compared to somebody who's looking at investing for the longer term. So as the screen shows you here, short term, we would have for savings as being a year period. Medium term would be maybe 2 years, and longer term might be 2 years plus. But the moment you start talking about investing, then you need to start thinking in a different sort of language. Short term is maybe the 0 to 5 years. Medium is 5 to 15, and long term is 15 years plus. Right? Understand those differences is quite key, especially if you are looking and reading stuff yourself, because from an investing perspective, you will most commonly see the bottom line. Right? Be aware of the top one as well. All right. So I don't know if you can move on to this one. And this links in quite nicely to a separate bit regarding savings and investments. I mean, they're bandaged together, but do people necessarily understand what the advisor or what you're reading about, how they're defining the difference? Quite often I've seen savings defined as something that somebody does on a regular basis, where investing is something that's done as a lump sum. Well, and I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying in the context of most financial planning, you'll actually find that saving is typically where you're using cash-based savings accounts. We call it a safe bet because you're not likely to lose your money, but you have to be aware, though, that obviously you're not likely to be making much either. And this is where you need to link it back to your goals. Are you prepared to take a risk with a goal? Okay, if it's short term, we would typically suggest you stick to a safe bet. If it's longer term and you're looking at longer term investments and you are happy to take risk, and we will talk about that in a separate session about the concept of risk attitude and your capacity to take loss. But investing broadly might deliver you the higher returns, but you're going to see ups and downs with it. The reason I'm stressing both these 2 points is because you need to put an overlay of what your goal is. Am I probably likely to be saving or investing to achieve that goal? And then another overlay that goes with this is your priority and the urgency of the goal. So, for example, you might say, I've got a goal where want something in 10 years' time. I'm prepared to take a high degree of risk, okay? And it's not important to me. In which case, if the risk goes against me, that's okay. I will just leave it longer. It means I'll just get there in a bit longer time. But if it's much more important to me, then it might be that you'd be saying, well, okay, it might be a longer term goal, but actually, because it's really important to me, should I be even touching, say, investing? Am I better off accepting the poor returns that interest-bearing accounts give me, but it gives me my safe bet? So there's a number of different overlays with the goals that need to be set. All right.
Great.
Hey.
There's essentially like one kind of, or an additional dimension to I guess goals and people's financial plans, which are kind of the next stage beyond foundations and getting through kind of achieving the goals, and that is around protection and estate planning. And these are the kind of things you put in place once you reach, you know, certain life stages, or, you know, when you kind of get to a point where it's important to protect your income or protect you know, your dependents in the event of a death or something, where they can kind of embed in additional layers of protection and address many of the scenarios that people can face, and address all those kind of what if scenarios in life. So these are the kind of things that we as advisors would kind of start layering in. Once we're confident and comfortable that people are where they need to be with their foundations, we've kind of covered off an initial plan for their goals, we will start assessing the needs for any type of protection, and we will also assess whether there's any kind of work to be done in terms of estate planning. So those cover things like wills and lasting powers of attorney, and essentially make sure that in the event of a death, money goes and things happen kind of in the way you want them to. So what you know, where have we got to now? Where have we got to in terms of financial foundation? So we went through putting together a budget, looking at your kind of current position, including any debts and classifying those, and really going through like the thought process of whether it's worth paying it off or kind of keeping debts, or whether it can, you know, potentially enhance your ability to take out a mortgage. We've gone through thinking through an emergency fund, how much to put aside for an emergency fund, and the fact that, you know, if you don't have an emergency fund, it can kind of set you back. And then finally, like how all of that then kind of links into your goals, and a bit around kind of goal setting, the part, you know, savings and investments kind of play when it comes to financial goals, and kind of other areas of financial planning to consider. One thing to note when it comes to financial plans is that, you know, they might be good at the point at which you kind of put them together, but people's lives evolve. You know, their kind of position can evolve, their income outgoings can evolve over time, but also the things that people want from life, you know, their hopes, their aspirations, any kind of specific goals they may have can change. So it's really important over time to continuously kind of review those different aspects, to kind of check in, particularly if there has been something that takes place that materially or significantly changes you know, certain aspects that you've worked into your plan, such as your income or your outgoings or whatever your kind of goals may be. Where you do have goals, one of the most important things to do is to kind of regularly check in and figure out whether you're on track with those goals. And really, a goal, a financial plan is something that evolves over time and is almost like a living document. It's something that's there that adapts as you adapt. And there are a number of things that people can do in order to kind of control how accurately or control how closely they're tracking their plan. People can adjust the amount that they're saving, they're investing. They can change the goals themselves. They can make them more achievable. And another kind of area of control is around the timelines for specific goals. And another thing we've seen with a number of the people that we advise is that as time goes on, people's attitudes or people's comfort levels with things like investing can change. So there are all these things that are worth kind of checking in on, and kind of where there are changes, working them through into your plans. Peter, I'm mindful of the fact that do you wanna answer a question we've got in?
I would like to. I'd also like to just add one comment onto the reviewing of the plan. This is something that, if I go back to when I was started advising back in 1995, 6, 7 onwards, during that time period, people often used to say, how regularly should I be reviewing my plan? And at that time, it used to be an answer of, well, broadly, it should be about every 12 months, you should review the plan. That has totally changed now. With the way apps work, with the way technology is information is so quickly available to you, that the response to that, how regularly should you do it? The answer is as regularly as you can physically update information into your system. Okay. And definitely the additional one that hasn't changed is, has something changed in your life? For example, have you had a child? Have you changed jobs? So certain events in life, you should be reviewing them. But the old adage of once every 12 months is a bit what I'd call old school. And now it's about, you can make these plans living, breathing things much more. Okay. I would just like to answer the question though. The question that we've had is regarding to paying off debt completely prior to a mortgage. Will it significantly alter the amount you can borrow? It's probably better off. The answer to it is in two parts. The first part is understanding, well, what is the impact? And broadly, the impact is they take that payment, and let's assume it's a monthly payment just for a start. They multiply that by 12, and they then would typically deduct that off the rest of your income. That is what they then multiply up to see how much they're going to lend you. So it's not about necessarily about how much you've got left outstanding. It's more to do with how much is that regular payment. So if you've got a little bit left outstanding, but it's a high payment, I would suggest to you that you may as well try and see if you can pay it off, because it will change your borrowing capacity. But if it's a large amount that you owe and you're not likely to pay it off fairly quickly, then it's much harder to be able to say to you what impact there will be, because you probably won't have any impact because the payment is still the same. But the overlay again with this is more about, well, how much do you need to borrow to be able to get what you want? So try not to look at it from a, how much can I borrow based upon the maximum, because you can only go one way from there. Okay. If you can work your plans around something that is affordable to you and gives you a bit of leeway, so that if there is a reduction in the amount you can borrow because of debt, you still can hit your target. And again, it's easy for me to say when I bought my property in 95 and the prices of properties have gone up so much, but try and do that. Try and not set your target that assumes for home buying that you must borrow the maximum amount you possibly can. Try not to do that. Easier said than done, I appreciate, but that you have less disappointments if you target to borrow slightly less than you think you can. Okay.
Yeah, I think, Peter, this was specifically with respect to student debt, which tends to be higher amounts, right?
Okay, well, it's broadly going to come to the same. It's the same answer.
Yeah.
Probably led a bit more to the fact of how much you can clear it. But if you can clear it, I would be working out how much do I want to borrow first. Can I borrow that, assuming that I have 12 times my current payment deducted, multiplied up. I say multiplied up, multiplying factors are one part of a mortgage process, and I don't want to get too much into that, but try to just work out whether it's a factor in the first place, because for many people it might not be, where for others it might be.
Yeah, I think the most relevant workshop we run on this will be the last one we run, where we can talk through exactly where someone's pinch point may be, like whether it's on the deposit side, the amount they can borrow side, whether it's some kind of calculation around their income. And once you've identified that, I think you can pinpoint whether what the best thing to do is with respect to any type of debt you have, including student debt.
Yeah.
But it's not, it's something that you probably need to kind of work through as a process. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for attending this workshop. We will be circulating the presentation pretty soon. And we look forward to those who've already registered. We really look forward to seeing you all in kind of follow-up workshops where we kind of talk through the more specific home buying elements. And until then, we hope you make moves in setting up all your financial foundations on the back of this workshop. Thank you very much for attending. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.